physical and virtual. So hopefully, the it's okay with you. But I know we went over about 5 7 minutes now, so I'll hand it over directly, Norma, to you to introduce your panel and then talk about this topic that we care very much. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Val, and thank you to everyone for being here today. It's terrific to be back with the CFF. You really focus on so many important issues, and this panel today is really going to focus on one of the critical issues facing our nation right now, and that is about managing cybersecurity risks, digital innovation, and the digital footprint in the transportation industry. My name is Norma Crea. I'm a vice president and chair of the cybersecurity, privacy, and digital innovation practice at Van Squike Associates. More relevant, though, I think for this discussion is the time that I spent in the government. And that was as the deputy chief of staff at the Department of Transportation, the State Department, and the Commerce Department. But today, this panel, this discussion, I think is very fitting as we think about the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And when we talk about the security of our transportation networks and the innovation that we've always seen in infrastructure, it is more important today that we focus on how do we manage, how do we protect, how do we share best practices across the transportation footprint. So we have an amazing panel, and I'm very excited about that today. I'm going to do some quick introductions, and then what we'll do is we're going to have everyone give a few opening remarks, and then we'll have questions to sort of get into the dialogue. Our panelists today are an amazing mix of executive branch officials who are spending every day of their lives trying to help us do exactly what I just talked about. Bob Kolaski, the director of the National Risk Management Center at CISA, or the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, always a mouthful, at the Department of Homeland Security. Sonia Proctor, who is the Associate Administrator for Surface Transportation at the Transportation Security Administration. Kyle Malo, Senior Director of Cybersecurity and CISO for WMATA, as an owner and operator of critical infrastructure. And we have Mina Levine, who's the CEO of the Chamber of Eco-Commerce. And she's, as we think about these nuances, again, what we're going to start with first is the role of the government and what's been happening in the last few months about helping to manage cybersecurity risks in transportation across all modes. Again, Kyle will come at this from an owner and operator perspective, which is critical. And Mina's working on a very important project, which is to try and create a national infrastructure bank, which would include funding opportunities to ensure that there's security and cyber being embedded at the front end when we're building infrastructure. So I'm going to turn this over first to Sonia Proctor to talk a little bit about TSA's legal and regulatory role in cybersecurity in the transportation industry, some of the initiatives that they have been rolling out, first with pipelines, and as we've seen, potentially into transit, rail, and aviation. And then from there, Sonia will go to Bob, and then Kyle and Mina. But Sonia, we're going to start with you.
Thank you so much, Norma, and thanks for this opportunity to be with this great panel to talk about something that I think should be on everyone's mind, cybersecurity. And just to kind of start off, last year in 2020, there were nearly 2,400 victims of ransomware, and they spanned every sector. Of course, transportation got its fair share. In May of this year, certainly surface transportation got on the radar in a big way because of a pipeline company who was the victim of a ransomware attack. And as they were victimized with the ransomware attack, they took some precautionary measures and shut down their actual pipeline operations because they were concerned that the ransomware attack could potentially migrate into the system that actually controls their operating technology. Fortunately, it did not. But when you think about that and think about the potential for the problem, shutting the pipeline down certainly prevented any further migration of the ransomware. But we all know from what we saw in the media, the impacts that had in terms of shortages at gas stations, concern at airports for jet fuel. This company is one of the major suppliers for fuel on the East Coast. So that really put the spotlight on TSA. TSA has responsibility for pipeline security. And TSA has always had the authority to use its authority as the Transportation and Security Administration to issue security directives. Security directives are the equivalent of a regulation, practically. And in this case, as we understood the impact of that attack and the concern that this could happen in other places, TSA exercised that authority and issued its first security directive in the pipeline sector. And that one was fairly simple. It required the designation of a cybersecurity coordinator that TSA could reach at any time. It required companies to report to CISA any kind of cybersecurity incident. Now, that's really huge because while we know that this happened in one company, what we're concerned about, suppose it happened in another company on the other side of the country and in another company somewhere else. We want to make sure that that information is coming into a central place where we can see it and assess it and understand what impact that may have, not only on that industry, but also on national security. So the third thing that was required there was for companies to conduct a self-assessment of their cybersecurity posture. Once we got through that, we really recognized that we needed to do something more, and the second security directive was issued. The second security directive has very specific mitigation measures that are required of the most critical pipelines in the country. And in this case, there are very specific actions that they must take on a specific timetable. And for those who have been following kind of the ransomware and some of the attacks, if you look at any of the bulletins that came out on the dark side attacks, that's where you can find the kind of measures that are recommended and included in the security directive. We know that these measures need to be taken because we are aware that there is a threat. We've briefed all of the relevant companies on the threat. We're in the process of continuing to brief all of them. We have briefed a significant number of them already. And TSA chose to use the security directive approach because it allowed us to move in a much more timely way to implement measures that were going to protect the national security involved with pipelines. So we are continuing to work through that now and working directly with the owner-operators, working with the associations. But most of all, we're working with CISA, with my colleague Bob Kolaski there, and the National Risk Management Center and his team there to both analyze the information that's coming in as companies report and to help us map the way forward as we continue to assess these impacts on surface transportation. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Sonia. Of course, that is a wonderful transition to what Bob is going to talk about. And Bob, hopefully everyone is aware of the work that what Bob and really CISA have done to create national critical functions that really meet all of the modes of transportation that I think for a long time people were not familiar with. And Bob, I know you're going to talk about that partnership, but we have certainly seen, as Sonia said, attacks on state DOTs, so Colorado DOT, San Francisco Muni, right, City of Atlanta, airlines, construction companies, Maersk, Costco, British Airways, and others. And so, Bob, really the partnership with TSA is really important. So tell us a little bit about that and then some of your other initiatives, because that national critical function structure is critical for people to understand.
Sure. Thanks, Norma. It's great to be here, and I always enjoy being with you and being with Sonia, and nice, Kyle, to be with you again, and hi, Mina. So to your question, Norma, what we're trying to do with the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency is have the back of the owners and operators of critical infrastructure. And when I say have the back, make sure that we in the federal government and in the national security and homeland security community are supporting the ability of, in this case, transportation sector owners and operators to enhance their cybersecurity and reduce risk to their systems. Not only supporting their ability, it's just, let me talk about how we support their ability, right? We support ability by getting information out there, by cobbling together, as Sonia said, information about threats to a variety of sectors, what we're seeing on digital networks, the kind of strains of malware or other things that lead to ransomware, other vulnerabilities that are out there in systems, things we know about, concerns about commodities, hardware, and software, and get that information together. And that means creating an information environment that we want everyone to be part of and put it in the hands as much as possible of network defenders to make security decisions. And then based on that information and where we see the risk, we are also trying to help owners and operators of critical infrastructure build out their own tools, do assessments. We offer assessments. TSA offers assessments of risk. Put in place security controls. We can point to lots of best practices, but something else we've been doing recently is publishing bad practices. Here are things that you can't be doing because they're bad, right? They're going to lead to adversaries exploiting your systems. And we have advisors around the country that provide those support services. And then the third element of that, so it's information, it's support services, but it's then identifying where, because of the nature of the investments that companies are able to make, or the interdependencies of systems, or the reality of digitalization, there's shared risk and collective risk that can't just be managed by one system. And my work in national critical functions, which is really a framework to understand that shared risk, to understand dependencies and interdependencies, the relationship between the transportation sector and the communication sector and IT systems that you rely on, and the energy you rely on, and how that all hangs together and help to manage that interdependent risk. And so, we spend a lot of our energy modeling and understanding that, understanding where the sources of technology risk come from, where the source of dependency risk come from, and then helping put together coalitions to address those risks. So if we can manage interdependent risk, if we can provide support through support services, and we can create a greater information sharing, we get to a point where we're more secure as a country. It does involve each company, each entity, each state and local government making a decision on their own to take cybersecurity seriously. And I hope at this point those decisions are made. But if we can make it more cost effective, more driven by information with greater understanding, I think that will help collectively us bring that sort of spirit of collective defense to the cybersecurity challenge.
That's exactly right. And you've done really, Bob, you and CIS have done amazing work to do that. I think the work of national critical functions, the identification of best practices, and honestly, the ones, as you said, here are the bad things you shouldn't do. It sometimes is, I think that's really helpful for people to see what they shouldn't do and how to manage that. That is a great, we have a nice seamless flow now to Kyle. So Kyle, obviously, for our audience, is doing amazing work to secure a very complicated system that is WMATA as an owner and operator. And Kyle, as you think about these issues, it'd be good to both share best practices. How have you knitted together what is a safety culture into a broader cybersecurity culture, change the hearts and minds of your leadership, and looked to work with partnering with the government to do just what Bob and Sonia have been talking about?
Yeah, thanks, Norma. And it's a pleasure to be with the Cyber Future Foundation today. Everyone that's out there virtually and in person. It's a great opportunity. I'm passionate about this. I've been in cybersecurity for a while now, both as on the government side and now, as Norma said, as an owner-operator. And when I have these conversations, I like to ask people, where do they come from? What are they representing? Because I think we all have a stake in actually delivering holistic cybersecurity. Are you a government entity, a regulator? Are you an owner-operator? Are you a manufacturer, a vendor that provides a lot of the software, hardware, operational technology that enables these the transit sector? Because what we find is that technology is baked into everything we do now. So you have employee-facing IT, which we're all very familiar with, your HR and your finance systems, maybe O365 is a platform that you use, most organizations do, or many do. We have customer-facing IT. Right? So we think about the complexity of cybersecurity. We have fare collection, advertising, scheduling software that reaches out to our customers and the public. We have building and structural IT like HVAC, elevators, escalator systems. We have command and control systems like train control, dispatching, communication, signaling systems. And of course, I'm very focused on rail. That's where I operate. So a lot of my context comes around that. But it's I think there's a lot of analogy or comparison with other elements of technology, or of transportation rather. And the last component is operational technology we can't overlook anymore, which is our rail cars, our buses, right, our switches and so forth. All of these technologies are starting to talk to each other. This is where the complexity of cybersecurity really emerges now in a way that we didn't see 5-10 years ago even. That the more we want operational technology to feed us business-related data, the more it puts that technology at risk. And we're right in the middle of that wave, that future kind of wave here as we modernize our technology and our platforms. That integration becomes really important. The business moves aggressively forward towards collecting that data, but we build weak bridges. We have historically relied on OT being what we call air-gapped, meaning it was completely disconnected or nearly completely disconnected from the outside world. That's just not the case anymore. And it's never going to be the case anymore. So therefore, we've now got to quickly come back and try to secure what could be decades of procurements. And technology that, again, was never designed to be secured. It just wasn't a thought when we bought some of this. So much of our technology lasts for, it's not like a desktop where you're refreshing it every 3 to 5 years. We're talking about some of this technology that lasts for decades and decades. Stuff that's bought maybe in the 80s that's still out there and operating. And that's a real challenge for us as a sector. At the same time, we continue to see threats, global threats emerge. Some of the things that Sonia talked about, very likely are Chinese actors, and the most major breaches we've seen this year are stemming from overseas state-sponsored actors, criminals, and potentially advanced persistent threats looking to have more of a political or economic impact on our country. What does that mean? Well, it means that we're not just dealing with a single person, some kid in his mother's basement. We're talking about very organized, structured approaches to attacking our sector right now. So we've got to be investing right now. Quite frankly, we're already behind the curve, I would say, in technologies that give us that defense in depth. We need to educate our employees on a regular basis, and I think that goes well beyond just computer-based training on an annual basis. We here at Metro do monthly phishing exercises, campaigns that are meant to mimic real-world attacks. To get employees used to what it looks like. We don't want them to fall for it, but when they do, it's a huge opportunity for them to learn that we think is great. We need to be adopting a framework, cybersecurity frameworks or risk management frameworks. I'm a big proponent of NIST. I think it's a very comprehensive approach that allows you to tailor security to your organization. And then a part of that component is an adoption of a framework is understanding what is most critical to your organization. So when we have these conversations, I understand, even the best funded organizations can't protect everything 100%. You've got to start with what we call your crown jewels. We have to go after critical command and control systems, where your customer's credit card information is. Think about the things that you can't run your business without as an operator. And then if you're on the vendor side, what are you developing? Are you developing these applications or these pieces of hardware to be deployed in a secure way? Because as Sonia mentioned, by the way, federal mandates are coming. I've been doing these presentations for a couple of years now, and up until this point, I've been saying, I think it's coming, just wait, but don't wait, right? Start now, and here it is. The first line of security directives hitting rail right now are in the works. We expect to see them soon. And these aren't necessarily easy things to achieve. When you talk about having a designated representative back to CISA, if you haven't hired the right person who's capable of really communicating effectively, you're already behind. You're behind in many ways because it probably suggests you don't have a cyber team in place. But more importantly, you won't even be able to meet some of the basic regulatory requirements right now. And this concerns me. Norma talked about the safety integration. I'll end on that point. All of this comes together in my mind, which is, as a sector, we understand safety. We get audited on it. We have federal standards around safety. Many of these have been around for many years. And we understand what happens if we don't run a safe system. It's a very bad news cycle or news week for us if somebody gets injured or worse in our system. And this is why safety is number one. I think what we need to do is elevate cybersecurity. It's certainly been part of my talking points across the sector and certainly in our organization, that safety and cybersecurity now go hand in hand. I would struggle to have anyone defend to me or I think they would struggle to defend that they have a very safe program if they have not invested in cybersecurity. What do I see in terms of current investments? I see teams of 3, 4, maybe 5 people trying to manage cybersecurity. And I can tell you right now, it is impossible to run any size transit organization with 3 or 5 people doing cybersecurity in the stuff we just talked about. And we would never run a safety program with 3 to 5 people. So we've got to change the mindset as organizations. So looking forward to having a great discussion, but these are things that obviously I'm very passionate about, and I think this whole panel is as well. I know they are.
Thank you, Kyle. You know, obviously that's spot on. And one of the things I want to say before we transition to Mina is, you know, I would go a step further to say cybersecurity is the #1 risk to safety right now, right? So if we're trying to change the hearts and minds of the transportation industry for dealing with today's problems, they have to understand, you know, if they're not managing cybersecurity risk, I'm not even sure that they have a full safety program, because we're talking about, you know, systems that touch people every single day. You know, one of the things is, as we transition to Mina, you know, looking ahead, the goal, obviously, when we think about building infrastructure, is making sure that it is safe, secure, and resilient. And cybersecurity is a part of that. We've certainly had innovative finance programs around for, you know, 20 plus years in the transportation industry that focus on building out public-private partnerships, right? It's not just public infrastructure, but it's private as well. But Mina, I know you're focused on trying to get Congress to do what might be the rock up the hill. I worked on this for 10 plus years and moved over to something else. But talk a little bit about your focus on the National Infrastructure Bank. And then from your vantage point, if this thing was created, where does cybersecurity fit in that type of funding model?
Thank you, Cyberfund.
Mina, I think you're on mute. You have to unmute yourself.
I thought I did.
There you go.
So thank you, Cyber Future Foundation, for hosting us today, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to be with you today to discuss the most fundamental of national security and preparedness imperatives, specifically assuring the comprehensive operational preparedness of America's transportation sector, and beyond it, the infrastructure sectors upon which transportation is reliant, and those infrastructure sectors reliant on transportation. We all agree that America is the most cyber-reliant nation on the planet, and America's reliance on cyberspace grows by the millisecond and makes it our nation's nervous system. Cyber predators, both foreign and domestic, recognize this reliance, and American cyber target values are acting accordingly. Let's start with some foundational questions that I believe have our nation where we find it today. We have created a single point of national failure, an Internet of Things or an Internet of American life, and our smart technologies that smart. With that, let me now pose some very fundamental questions, critical infrastructure preparedness focused questions. Do we have a clear understanding of what our critical infrastructure is? Do we understand our resilience needs in terms of this critical infrastructure? How much critical infrastructure protection is required to protect America's critical infrastructures? How much security is required to secure the global networks? How much information must be shared to have an adequate amount of timely, accurate, actionable, and frequently updated information, situational awareness, if you will, to prevent consequences or at least ensure the predictable provision of the cyber-reliant critical infrastructure services, products, and things that are the foundation of American life? Finally, I ask you to think back 25 years or so, the dawn of the critical infrastructure protection era. Recall the preparedness condition of our infrastructures then. Now bring yourself to where we sit today and ask yourself, what have we accomplished? The places where all America's interdependent vertical critical infrastructure sectors naturally merge is horizontally across every American community. With the rapidly growing foreign and domestic exploitation of our critical infrastructures and beyond smart technologies, America's infrastructures must be made and kept operationally resilient or smarter. Resilience across the spectrum of American life is the product of continuously knowing what systems, products, and services are critical to you and how long you are willing to be without them. I believe given America's current infrastructure preparedness trajectory and the absence of efforts to effectively reduce their target values, surrenders the initiative to our adversaries. We must move immediately beyond the objectively unmeasurable goals of infrastructure protection and security-based preparedness. Because financial resources are always an impediment to real innovation and positive change, Secure America Smarter partners the creation of a national infrastructure bank and American Infrastructure Renaissance and National Preparedness Council. The bank would serve as an objective clearinghouse for creating community-based infrastructure investments, and its council, the connection to the American people, to those who know ground truth and their infrastructure requirements best, and where all vertical or functional infrastructure sectors naturally merge. Under the bank, community-based infrastructure preparedness requirements would be collected, coordinated, validated, and triaged by private sector, local and state authorities for submission to the federal government. The execution of resulting federal infrastructure resources then be administered through the bank and monitored by its council. In this private-public preparedness partnership, infrastructure providers, businesses, communities, and local state governments take center stage. The bank and its council will engage businesses, community leaders, government agencies, technical and degree-granting educational institutions, and citizens by institutionalizing an objectively measurable, operationally proven, question and answer based information exchange effort to build and sustain smart plus resilient infrastructures. We ask that you consider including resources for manual backup and people certified to operate them for every critical automated system you are reliant upon. The resources for such preparedness investments are squarely in the lane of the National Infrastructure Bank and its council. In summary, we are convinced investing in and dramatically accelerating the creation of resilient critical infrastructures as the foundation for building sustainable national security and preparedness. We are also convinced that only by building and sustaining smarter critical infrastructures will we eliminate America's cyber Achilles heel and empower all Americans to ensure their safety, security, quality of life, and future for these generations to follow. I thank you for your time and attention and invite you to join Secure America Smarter Partnership. Thank you.
Thank you, Mina. I'm sorry. Because we started late, our government speakers have some deadlines, and I want to make sure we can get some questions in before we lose. I know, Bob, I know we're going to lose you in just a few minutes. Sonia, hopefully you can stay on with us as well. So let me just jump right into a question, maybe mostly for Bob and Sonia before Bob has to go. But Bob, when we talk about, infrastructure and particularly transportation, a good tie-in really is the work that you and Sonia are doing on the ICS sectors, right? That difference between OT and IT. And there are some very serious nuances in how to manage and secure those. So maybe, Bob, I'm going to go to you first to talk a little bit about what you've been doing in that area. And then Sonia, jump over to you and we'll go from there.
Sure. So ICS industrial control systems, as you know, and those control systems tend to be hardware heavy systems that have long shelf lives that help operate transportation networks in this case and in other critical infrastructure. I think at this point it is well understood that control systems shouldn't be linked to information technology systems, and as much as possible you should be separating that so that as Sonia was describing the Colonial Pipeline incident, IT systems can't be a vector into bringing down operational technology attacks. But that's not enough, right? You also have to secure fundamentally your operational technology systems, how they connect to running your operations in general. Think about security by design as you buy. how you understand operation technology systems as high value assets and have appropriate security in place. And if something happens, how you back up plans to operate systems on there. And so those are the core concepts we're trying to push forward in security industrial control systems. We've gone further with a national security memorandum that the president signed late summer. He established and asked the Department of Homeland Security to work with NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, to set performance goals for industrial control system users. And on September 22nd, the Secretary of Homeland Security released a set of 9 performance goals for industrial control systems. They're available on CISA's website, and they provide guidance. They are a roll-up of a series of different standards into this is what level of performance you as an operator who rely on industrial control systems should expect, and you should put security practices in place in organizations like WMATA to reach those performance goals. They're non-binding, but I think they give a good roadmap for where you should be going on industrial control systems. And we want to keep building off that. We want to keep then looking at sort of the sector specific, and I think there's a good handoff to Sonia, the sector specific aspects. And in the next few months, we will be updating these performance goals for different sectors and releasing sector specific performance goals. Again, to give sort of a unifying set of this is the outcome you should expect from your security systems, your operational technology and information technology. And that then allows us to anchor in what are the standards, what are the practices that will help you get to that outcome so that there's a shared understanding and you can bring that conversation into the boardroom. I want to fund toward this because the government expects us to reach this level of performance, and this is how I'm going to get to that level of performance. And let me have the conversation about how this investment is going to raise our metrics to reach that performance. I like the idea of a goal rather than a minimum, right? We're going to acknowledge there's a gap between where a lot of organizations are right now. Set a goal to get you to a higher place, and I hope that enables the kind of conversations in environments like Kyle's to how we're going to get to that goal.
Right. That's exactly right. Sonia?
And, Bob really did open the door on that. And, I think what we're learning right now is where the industry is so that we can start setting those higher level goals. Now, Kyle said something that was really important, and I think a lot of people don't think about. Industrial control systems have been around for a long time. They're decades old in a lot of cases, but they're workhorses, and that's why they've been around for so long. But when they were established, when they were installed, security wasn't an issue. So they just wanted something that was a reliable workhorse, and they got these industrial control systems, and they're still in place today. So that separation that Bob was talking about, that is really, really critical, separating your IT, your business operations from your operating technology. Then you wouldn't shut down your whole business because you're not sure that one is going to migrate to the other, which is what happened with the pipeline company. But setting those higher goals, it's going to be incremental for us. Certainly there is an expense for companies. Upgrading their IT is not a small expense. In some cases, particularly companies that have facilities all across the nation, it will be millions of dollars for them to meet the standards that are going to be required for them to be secure in their, particularly on their operating technology side. So, and I think there's one thing for the mass transit systems, I would say, really, really important, because they are the next ones on our radar. They need to have a Kyle because he gets it. And there are so many who are still looking at this as, it would be nice if we could have a full cyber team, but we're really more focused on physical security.
Right.
It's your cyber that's going to take your system down.
Yeah.
It's going to take the whole system down. So they need to hear somebody like Kyle, who really does get it and who really is, I mean, he's in one of the most challenging systems in the country. Lots of lessons he can share with them.
Yeah, that's right. I do want to come back to the point about performance goals by sector. But Kyle, let's, as the owner operator here, apparently what we need to do is replicate you 100,000 times. So maybe we can clone you and send you out around the world. But maybe, you've had a really interesting experience taking all of your amazing expertise at the FBI, right? Coming into a transit organization and trying to change and transform the culture to understand that. So maybe just take a minute to talk about that, because I think that's helpful for people to hear how you've done that. It's a work in progress, but you've succeeded.
Yeah. And if you can clone me and I can get some get some kind of fees out of this or something, that'd be great. Then. But no, it's interesting you bring that up, because it was a helpful component of the dialogue when I first got to Metro here, DC, was talking about the national security side. I think the first step was getting the organization to, and they did, which is great, was to appreciate, though, that we're on a national stage now. We are not by ourselves in one single city. We are part of a global community. And that means we're part of we're in a place right now where global threat actors have real interest in you for a whole lot of reasons that I just don't think people fully appreciated several years ago. And I think many organizations have come a long way. When you see what happens to something like Colonial Pipeline, it's not just the company. It's not just the $5 million ransom they paid. It's the tens, 20, probably hundreds of millions of dollars on economic impact that had across the entire Eastern Seaboard. One of the conversations we had here in DC was around the impact to the government, the federal government, if our transportation system were shut down. There is not enough parking in DC for every federal employee to come into the city and drive themselves in, right? It's just not feasible. So we think about that. We think about the economic impact. Every time a metro station is opened, you see sometimes hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars in economic revenue for that region around a single station. And we know this, and our officials know this. And so when we talk about that not working, then we put it in terms of dollars. We put it in terms of safety impact. There's a lot of context we can add to cybersecurity that I think resonates with executives in transit and in transportation in general, that we've just got to kind of tune them into that world and that perspective. And if you can have that serious conversation, I think all of a sudden it elevates that. The last thing I'll just say is on risk real quick, which is most organizations have a chief risk officer, and that was the other angle that we talked a lot about when I first got here, was elevating cybersecurity as a high priority risk for our chief risk officer, equal to some of those things we talked about in terms of safety, reliability, and so forth. So there's many ways to kind of frame the cyber dialogue, and I think all of them are necessary to really appreciate the why we need to be making the investment. You're on mute, Norma.
Thank you for that. I want to comment on one piece that I think is important when we talk about the transportation industry. It is a very complicated industry amongst modes of transportation, and that's the term we use when we're separating out transit, rail, aviation, motor carrier. Pipelines is actually part of that as well. And a lot of these companies are publicly traded. So when we talk about cybersecurity risk, the SEC already mandates that companies have cybersecurity protections. They have to report cyber as well, and their CEOs actually are personally liable for signing off on company cybersecurity practices. There are different nuances, though, when owners and operators are really public entities, right? When governments are trying to run and operate systems. And so those include airports. WMATA is a very good example of a hybrid transit. Freight rail is all privately owned. So, those nuances are key. So we want to make sure as the audience is listening, we're trying to get into the nuances to make things better. Well, I will say, having watched some publicly traded companies and their disclosures, they may disclose partial risk, but not full risk. And that's a cultural change or a legal and enforcement change I think we're going to be seeing coming from the government. Mina, and we're getting, I think, in our last few minutes, you talked, as you mentioned, the National Infrastructure Bank as being lots of things. The traditional view of a National Infrastructure Bank is the funding part. But I thought you mentioned some discussion where there would be some requirement where the federal government, if they're giving money through the bank, would actually assess people's cybersecurity preparedness. Did I hear you right about that?
Basically, what we are talking about is that we go back to the communities because all these and collect requirements from the local communities and then report them to the federal government through the National Infrastructure Bank. Because
Okay.
all the problems are mostly this to mitigate the risk and build these solutions to mitigate the risk, it has to start from bottom up. And that's why we believe very strongly that we have to engage communities, businesses, and local governments, state and local governments, and fund those projects through the National Infrastructure Bank and collect the requirements and then work with the federal government.
Got it. Okay. All right. Thank you for that update. I think that was just wanted to clarify that. So I know, looking at the time, I think we only have 2 more minutes and we're going to lose Sonia. So I'm just going to do sort of lightning round questions. And that is, Sonia, Bob talked about performance goals, which we've seen on ICS, but he talked about sector specific performance goals. So before you go, can you tell us a little bit about what that piece is and maybe how that will break out between TSA and CISA? Or can you talk about your next rollout, which you mentioned transit, we know rail, we've heard aviation. I know aviation is outside of your surface focus, but any of those pieces I think would be helpful to the audience.
Yeah, and the next rollout's coming soon. It's going to be within, we don't have a date set yet because we're still listening to input from the industry, but I think it's probably safe to say it's going to be within the next 30 days. And that rollout will be for mass transit and passenger rail, and also for freight rail. So those will be the modes that are going to be affected by the next set of security directives. Now, those will be the high risk systems that will be affected by security directives, and those that are lower risk will be covered by an information circular. I think people in aviation are more familiar with information circulars, so it's fairly new to surface transportation. But the lower risk systems will be covered by an information circular, so they will not be they won't be regulated in that sense. Those will be strong suggestions that we think that they should follow.
Okay.
And if they're really smart, they'll be looking into the future. So, but the freight rail and mass transit high risk will be in a regulatory structure with security directives.
Got it. Okay. Well, on Kyle, apparently you and your brother and sister sectors will have a Christmas holiday surprise. Sorry, Sonia, I don't mean to tease you, but let's do this. I know, we started a little bit late. Val was kind enough to give us a few more minutes, and we're even a minute over, but I'd like to just thank the panel. We could go on for hours about these conversations because they're so critical. These are really important points. And certainly as we think about transportation, I always say more than any other sector, it touches every person, right? Every life in the United States. And so we do need to work better together on how we address and fix these issues, including best practices and other things. So on behalf of CFF, thank you so much, everybody. I'm sorry we didn't have more time to talk about these issues. I'll look forward to continuing the dialogue. And Val, I'll turn it back to you.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you all the panelists, Sonia, Kyle, Bob, and Mina, and Norma. Thanks for pulling this off. This is a very important topic. Could be a full day's session, just as each of the sessions that we have had. So we're looking forward to your guidance and direction. This was extremely, helpful to take it forward. And Sonia, ma'am, thank you for giving us a heads up on the 30 days. So we are all bracing up to it. And we are looking forward to, working with GHS. Overall, we have every agency within GHS represented. So hopefully we'll be able to do this public-private partnership and collaboration to secure the infrastructure and work together. So thank you very much. It was a great panel, great contribution. Okay.